The gunshot cracked through the dusty air of Willow Creek. Willa Sutton stumbled backward, her pregnant belly a perfect target against her worn dress. She hit the ground hard. Dust exploded around her. Her hands flew to her unborn child, a desperate, silent prayer. Above her, a man. Broderick Quinn. His revolver was still smoking, but he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the dead rattlesnake, its body twitching just a foot from where she'd fallen. "Don't move," Broderick said, his voice as steady as a rock. "That thing might have friends." It was the summer of 1876. The Arizona heat baked the very air you breathed, making even danger move in slow motion. Willa had just been in town for flour and beans. She never expected to nearly step on death itself. She never expected a stranger to knock her flat in the street. All to save her life. "My baby," she whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with a fear that went deeper than any snake bite. "Please, my baby." Broderick holstered his gun. In a second he was kneeling beside her, his weathered face softening. "Let's get you somewhere safe, madam. Can you stand?" Willa nodded, tears blurring the edges of the world. He offered a calloused hand, and she took it, letting him pull her to her feet. The townspeople, who'd scattered like chickens, were now creeping back, whispering. Mr. Peterson, the general store owner, rushed over. "Mrs. Sutton, are you all right?" "I think so," she said, her hands shaking as she brushed dirt from her dress. "Thanks to this gentleman." Broderick just tipped his hat, just did what anyone would have done. His eyes, the color of faded denim, scanned her from head to toe. He wasn't just looking at her. He was assessing her like a puzzle he needed to solve. "You should see the doctor. Make sure everything's okay." Shame burned her cheeks. "I don't have the money for that." His jaw tightened. He didn't say a word. He just reached into his pocket and pulled out a few silver coins. He pressed them into her palm, closing her fingers around them. "I insist," he said, his voice low and firm, "for the little one's sake." She started to protest, but the look in his eyes stopped her cold. It wasn't pity. It was something else, something fierce. "Thank you, Mr. Broderick Quinn. Folks call me Broad." "Willa Sutton," she replied, a sharp twinge in her back making her wince. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Quinn, but I can't take your money." "Consider it a loan," he said. "I'll be in town for a spell. You can pay me back when you're able." But before she could answer, a hot, sharp pain shot through her belly. She doubled over with a gasp. Broderick caught her before she could fall again, his face suddenly pale with alarm. "Doctor!" he shouted, scooping her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. "Where's the doctor in this town?" The blacksmith pointed. "End of the street. White building, green door." Broderick didn't wait. He just ran. With Willa cradled against his chest, he strode down that dusty street, ignoring the stairs. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her cheek, smell the scent of leather and sage that clung to him. And in the middle of all the fear, a strange feeling washed over her. She felt safe. "My husband," she whispered, the words tumbling out. "He's been gone 3 months. A mining accident." Broderick's stride didn't falter, but his arms tightened around her, just for a second. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Sutton." "It's just Willa now," she said, another wave of pain making her grip his shirt. He didn't bother knocking on the doctor's door. He kicked it. "Help!" he yelled. "Got a pregnant woman here who's taken a fall." The door flew open. A man in spectacles stared, his eyes wide. "Bring her in, quickly." Broderick carried her to a small room in the back and laid her gently on a narrow bed. When he tried to step away, she found herself holding on to his shirt, her knuckles white. "Stay," she whispered, then blushed. "I mean, if you wouldn't mind. I have no one else." Something flashed in his eyes. He gave a single sharp nod and moved to the corner of the room, standing like a sentinel as the doctor began his work. He never took his eyes off her. The doctor's face was grim. "These pains, it could be early labor, or just the shock. We'll have to watch you closely." Broderick cleared his throat, his voice filling the small room. "Whatever she needs," he said, his gaze fixed on the doctor. "I'll cover it." The doctor looked at him, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes, but he didn't ask. He just nodded. "Bed rest, for at least a day. I'll have my wife prepare a room for you here." "I have a room at the boarding house," Willa interrupted, not wanting to be a burden. "I can't let you walk back there," the doctor countered. "I'll carry her," Broderick said, stepping forward from the shadows of the corner. "And I'll make sure she stays put. I happen to be staying at the same place." It was a strange coincidence, almost too strange, but Willa was too tired and scared to question it. After the doctor gave her a bitter tonic for the pain, Broderick lifted her into his arms again. As they walked back down the street, she could feel the whole town watching them. "They'll talk," she murmured against his shoulder. He just shrugged. "Let them. You need help. I'm here to give it. Nothing more to it than that." But Willa knew, deep in her bones, that wasn't true. There was something more to it. This man, this cowboy who appeared from nowhere to save her, wasn't just a kind stranger. He was in Willow Creek for a reason, and she had a terrifying feeling that she was part of it. He wasn't just passing through. He was on a mission, and his mission had just begun. Mrs. Holloway, the owner of the boarding house, met them at the door with a gasp. "Goodness gracious! What's happened?" "Mrs. Sutton had a close call with a rattler," Broderick explained, his voice calm and even. He left out the part where he'd knocked her down. "She needs rest. Which room is hers?" "Second floor, last on the right," Mrs. Holloway said, bustling ahead. "Poor dear. And you, sir? I don't believe we've met. Brod Quinn. Checked in yesterday." "Oh, yes, the cowboy from Colorado," she said, giving him a curious look. "Mighty good of you to help her like this." When they reached Willa's small room, Broderick laid her down on the bed. For a moment she missed the warmth of his arms. It was a foolish thought, a dangerous one, but she couldn't help it. "I'll fetch some water and a compress," Mrs. Holloway chirped, leaving them alone. Broderick stood awkwardly by the door, his hat in his hands. He looked like he was about to leave. "Wait," Willa said, the word escaping before she could stop it. I don't even know how to thank you." "No thanks needed," he said, his gaze fixed on the floorboards. "Just doing what's right." "Few men would call this what's right," she observed, watching him closely. There was a tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his eyes that didn't match his easygoing words. "What really brings you to Willow Creek, Mr. Quinn?" A shadow passed over his face, so quick she almost missed it. "Looking for work. Cattle outfit I was with went bust." It sounded plausible. It was the kind of story 100 men told every day in the territory, but the way he said it felt rehearsed, practiced. "Not much work around here," Willa said, testing him. "Not since the silver mine closed. After the accident." His head snapped up. His eyes, those faded denim eyes, were suddenly sharp as knives. "The one that took your husband?" "Yes." Her hand instinctively went to her belly, where the baby gave a sudden hard kick. "Thomas. He came west to make our fortune. He was a miner." "I see," Broderick said, his voice carefully neutral. But it wasn't. There was an edge to it now, a hunger for information. "That's a tough way to make a living." "It's a tough way to die," she whispered. Something passed between them then, an understanding. But it wasn't about shared loss. It was something else, a current of unspoken knowledge that made the hair on her arms stand up. He knew something. He knew something about the mine, about the accident, about Thomas. Before she could ask, Mrs. Holloway returned with the tray. "Here we are. Now, Mr. Quinn, you must let this poor woman rest." He nodded, putting his hat back on. "I'll check on you in the morning, Mrs. Sutton," he said, but his eyes were sending a different message. They were saying, "This isn't over. If you need anything, I'm just down the hall. Room 3. "Thank you, Broderick," she said, using his first name. She wanted to see his reaction. A small smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Rest well, Willa." After he was gone, Mrs. Holloway gave her a knowing look. "That's a good man there. Don't see his kind often." "I hardly know him," Willa said, but her voice was weak. "Sometimes you don't need to know a man long to know his character," the older woman replied. But Willa wasn't thinking about his character. She was thinking about his secrets. That night she didn't dream of rattlesnakes or falling. She dreamed of the look in Broderick Quinn's eyes when she mentioned the silver mine. It was the look of a hunter who had just caught the scent of his prey, and she was terrified that she was the bait. True to his word, Broderick knocked on her door the next morning. He carried a breakfast tray, but his smile seemed forced. "How are you feeling?" he asked, setting the tray on her lap. "Better," she lied. "The pains have stopped." He opened the curtains, letting the bright morning sun stream in. He moved with a purpose that didn't fit a drifting cowboy. Every action was precise, controlled. He wasn't just a man looking for work. He was a man looking for answers. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked, the question sharp in the quiet room. He turned, and for a second the mask slipped. She saw a flash of something hard and unforgiving in his eyes before he smoothed it over. "Doing what?" "Helping me," she pressed. "You don't know me. You're spending your own money on me. You're putting yourself out for a complete stranger. Why?" He sat on the edge of her bed, his presence filling the small space. "I told you. I know what it's like to be alone." It was a good answer, a noble one, and a complete lie. She could feel it. She decided to push back to see what would happen. "The mine accident," she said, her voice steady. "The one that killed Thomas. They said it was a cave-in, an unsupported tunnel." Broderick's posture didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. "That's what you were told?" The question hung in the air between them. Not, "That's what happened," but, "That's what you were told?" It was a crack in his story, a tiny opening, and she dove right in. "What do you know about it, Broderick?" He looked away, out the window, at the dusty street below. "I hear things. A man on his own. You hear a lot of stories." "What kind of stories?" He stood up, pacing the small room like a caged wolf. "Just talk, Willa. Nothing for you to worry about." "My husband is dead," she said, her voice rising. "I am alone, 7 months pregnant, and a stranger who knows more than he's saying has just inserted himself into my life. I think I have plenty to worry about." He stopped pacing and faced her. The kindness was gone from his face, replaced by a grim resolve. "Your husband, Thomas. He wasn't just a simple miner. He was onto something, something big." Her blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "He found a new vein. Rich with silver, so rich it could make a man a king." He didn't register the claim. He was trying to keep it a secret. Willa stared at him, her mind racing. Thomas had been secretive in the weeks before he died. He'd been excited, but also afraid. He'd told her they were about to have everything they'd ever dreamed of. "Who else knew?" she whispered. "The man who owned the mine," Broderick said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "A man who doesn't like to share. A man who would do anything to keep that silver for himself." "Are you saying—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "The cave-in wasn't an accident, Willa," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "It was murder." The room tilted. The air grew thin. Thomas hadn't died in an accident. He had been murdered. And this man, this stranger, knew all about it. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm a friend of Thomas," he said. It was another lie. She knew it instantly. He wasn't a friend. He was a partner, or a rival, or something much, much worse. He wasn't here to help her. He was here for the silver. He was here for the unregistered claim. And he thought she knew where it was. The kind stranger was gone. In his place was a man with a deadly purpose, and she was standing right in his way. The danger wasn't the rattlesnake in the street. The real danger was right here, in her room. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the frantic beating of Willa's heart. He was a friend of Thomas? The words echoed in her mind, a clanging bell of warning. Thomas never mentioned a Broderick Quinn, not once. "You're lying," she said, the words sharp and clear. He didn't flinch. He didn't deny it. He just held her gaze, a silent admission of his deceit. Sometimes a lie is the only way to get to the truth. "And what truth is that?" she demanded, pushing the breakfast tray away. Her appetite was gone, replaced by a cold dread. "The truth about what happened to your husband," he said, "and what he left behind." He was talking about the silver, the secret claim, the fortune that had cost Thomas his life. Willa's mind spun. Thomas had left journals, maps, scraps of paper with strange symbols. She'd packed them all away in a small leather-bound trunk, thinking they were just the ramblings of a dreamer. Now she realized they were a death warrant. "I don't know anything about a silver claim," she said, her voice shaking but firm. It was a lie, but her life, and her baby's life, might depend on it. Broderick's eyes narrowed. He was studying her, trying to see past the words to the truth she was hiding. "Maybe you don't, but someone thinks you do. Someone is getting nervous. The rattlesnake in the street, that wasn't a random act of nature, Willa. That was a message, a warning. A wave of nausea washed over her. The snake hadn't been an accident. Someone had put it there. To scare her, to hurt her. Who? She breathed. "That's what I'm here to find out," he said. He took a step closer to the bed. "The man who runs this town, the man who owned the mine. Mr. Whitewater. He presents himself as a respectable businessman, but he's the one who got rich after the accident. He's the one with everything to lose if the truth comes out. Mr. Whitewater, the owner of the biggest ranch in the territory. He practically owned Willow Creek. He was powerful, feared, and respected, and according to this stranger, he was a murderer. A knock at the door made them both jump. It was the doctor. "Good morning," he said, bustling in. He gave Broderick a nod. "Mr. Quinn, I see you're taking good care of our patient." "Always," Broderick said, his charming cowboy smile snapping back into place so quickly it made Willa dizzy. The transformation was terrifying. He was a chameleon, changing his colors to suit the situation. While the doctor examined her, Willa's mind raced. Broderick stood in the corner again, silent and watchful. He was playing a part, the concerned friend, the helpful stranger. But she knew the truth now. He was a hunter, and this whole town was his hunting ground. She was caught in his trap. Over the next week, a strange and terrifying routine began. Broderick was her constant shadow. He brought her meals. He walked with her to the general store, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, a gesture that looked protective to the townspeople but felt like a brand to Willa. He was marking his territory. He was telling everyone and anyone watching that she was his. The town buzzed with whispers. The lonely widow and the handsome cowboy. It was a story they all understood. A romance blooming from tragedy. It was a perfect cover. "They think we're courting," she said one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch. "Let them," Broderick said, not looking at her. His eyes were scanning the street, watching every shadow, every movement. It keeps you safe. Safe from what? From Mr. Whitewater. From his men, Broderick corrected. He won't get his own hands dirty, but he has plenty of hired guns who will. They see you with me. They might think twice before trying something. So that's what this was. She was a shield, a piece in his dangerous game. The anger that had been simmering inside her boiled over. And what about you, Broderick? Should I be safe from you? He finally turned to look at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes stunned her into silence. It wasn't greed or malice. It was pain, a deep, aching pain. Thomas wasn't just a friend, he said, his voice rough with an emotion he could no longer hide. He was my brother. The world stopped spinning. His brother. My mother died when I was born, he explained, the words coming out in a rush. My father couldn't handle it. He left me on a church step. The Suttons, your Thomas's parents, they took me in. We were raised together. We weren't brothers by blood, but we were brothers in every other way. Willa stared at him, speechless. This changed everything. He wasn't here for the silver. He was here for revenge. When he wrote to me about the silver, he was scared, Broderick continued. He said Whitewater was pressuring him. He told me if anything happened to him, I was to come. He said he left something for me. Something that would prove what Whitewater did. The trunk, Willa whispered. His papers. His maps. Broderick nodded. He trusted you to keep it safe. He knew you wouldn't understand what it was, which would protect you. But now she was no longer protected. Now 2 men were circling her. One who wanted to kill her for what she might know, and another who was using her to avenge a murder. She was trapped between a killer and an avenger. I found work, he announced abruptly, changing the subject, at the Whitewater Spread. The audacity of it took her breath away. You're going to work for the man who murdered your brother? It's the only way, he said, his jaw set. I have to get close to him, find his weaknesses, find proof. He hesitated, then looked at her, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen it. But I can't leave you here alone. You're a target. So what do you suggest? She asked, her voice laced with sarcasm. He took a deep breath. I have a proposition for you, Willa, a practical one. Her heart started to pound. She knew what was coming. We get married, he said. The words hung in the air, insane and unbelievable. You can't be serious. As a heart attack, he replied. Think about it. As my wife, you can come with me to the ranch. Whitewater is giving me a small cabin for married hands. I can protect you there. No one would dare harm the wife of one of his own men, right under his nose. It's the perfect cover. For both of us. It was a cold, calculated plan, a marriage of convenience, a sham to hide them in the lion's den. There was no mention of affection, no hint of romance. It was a business arrangement, a strategy for survival and revenge. It would just be an arrangement, he added quickly, as if reading her mind. A name, protection, nothing more. Once this is over, once I have justice for Thomas, you'll be free. She looked at him, this stranger who was her dead husband's secret brother, this man who was asking her to tie her life to his, to chain herself to his quest for vengeance. She thought of the baby kicking inside her, Thomas's baby. She had to protect their child, and as crazy as it sounded, this might be the only way. Marrying him was a risk, a terrible, life-altering risk, but staying alone in Willow Creek, a target for a man like Whitewater. That was a death sentence. She had no choice. She was a pawn in a game she never asked to play. Yes, she heard herself say, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. I'll marry you. His shoulders slumped in relief. But the look he gave her wasn't one of triumph. It was one of shared destiny, a grim acceptance that their paths were now bound together, for better or for worse, until death or justice did them part. They were married the following Saturday, a quick, quiet ceremony in the town's small church. Mrs. Holloway and the doctor served as witnesses, their faces a mixture of surprise and cheerful approval. They saw a whirlwind romance, a new beginning. They didn't see the truth. They didn't see the cold, hard bargain being struck at the altar. As Willa spoke her vows, she looked into Broderick's eyes. There was no love there, only a shared, desperate purpose. He was her protector. She was his cover. It was a lie they would have to live every single day. Whitewater, a large, imposing man with a booming laugh and eyes as cold as a winter river, was delighted. A wife, he'd bellowed when Broderick told him. A man works harder when he has a family to provide for. I've got a small cabin on the edge of the property. It's yours. The cabin was 2 rooms, barely more than a shack. But as they moved their few belongings inside, Willa felt a strange sense of finality. This was her life now, a pretend marriage to a man on a mission of revenge, living on the land of her husband's murderer. True to his word, Broderick made a bed for himself on the floor, giving Willa the small, lumpy mattress. The nights were the hardest. They would lie in the darkness, inches apart, yet miles away, the silence between them thick with unspoken secrets and fears. During the days he worked the ranch, his eyes and ears always open, searching for any scrap of information, any weakness he could exploit. Willa tried to make the cabin a home, cleaning and cooking, preparing for the baby. She watched the other ranch hands, the hard, dangerous-looking men in Whitewater's employ. Any one of them could have been there that day in the mine. Any one of them could be watching her right now. One evening, Broderick came back to the cabin late. He was quiet, his face dark with a controlled fury. He didn't eat the stew she'd made. He just stood by the window, staring out into the blackness. "What is it?" she finally asked. "I was talking to one of the older hands today," he said, his voice low. "He was drunk, started talking about the mine. He said the cave-in was a little too perfect, a little too neat. He said they used dynamite." Willa's hand flew to her mouth. Dynamite! It wasn't a collapse, it was an explosion, a deliberate, calculated act of murder. "He said," Broderick continued, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides, "that Thomas wasn't the only one in that tunnel. There was another man with him, a geologist he'd hired to survey the claim. But the reports, they only found Thomas's body." "Exactly," Broderick said, turning from the window to face her. "They buried the geologist in the rubble. They didn't want any witnesses, anyone who could officially verify the strike. But the old hand said something else. He said the geologist kept meticulous records. He had a ledger, a book where he documented every finding, every measurement, with his official seal on every page." "A ledger?" Willa asked, confused. "What does that matter?" "It's proof, Willa," he said, his eyes burning with intensity. "It's undeniable proof of the silver strike, registered by a licensed professional. If that ledger exists, it proves Thomas's claim. It gives Whitewater a motive for murder that any court would recognize. The old hand thinks the geologist had it with him in the mine." "So it's buried with him," she said, her heart sinking. "Maybe," Broderick said. "Or maybe Thomas found it. Maybe he took it before the blast. Maybe he hid it." They both looked at the small leather trunk sitting in the corner of the cabin, the trunk full of Thomas's papers. With trembling hands, Willa knelt and opened it. Together they began to sort through the contents, maps of the territory, pages of calculations, personal letters, but no ledger. "It's not here," she said, her hope fading. Broderick sifted through the papers one last time, his frustration growing. Then he stopped. He pulled out a small folded piece of paper from the bottom of the trunk. It wasn't a map. It was a receipt. A receipt from the Willow Creek Bank for the rental of a safe deposit box. It was dated 2 days before Thomas's death. They stared at each other, the same thought dawning on them both. The ledger wasn't in the cabin. It wasn't in the mine. It was somewhere safe. Somewhere Whitewater couldn't get to it. He knew, Willa whispered in awe. Thomas knew something was going to happen. He was protecting the proof. And he was protecting you, Broderick added softly, by not telling you about it. But now they knew. The key to bringing Whitewater down was sitting in a metal box in the town bank. But there was a problem, a big one. The box was in Thomas Sutton's name, and Thomas Sutton was dead. Only his legal heir could access it, and his legal heir was his wife, Willa. The plan had been for Broderick to keep her safe, to hide her away while he hunted for proof. But now the tables had turned. She was no longer the bait. She was the key. She was the only one who could get that ledger. And to do that, she would have to walk back into Willow Creek, straight into the path of the man who wanted her dead. The realization settled over them like a shroud. This quest for vengeance was no longer just Broderick's. Now it was hers, too. I have to go to the bank, Willa said, her voice quiet but firm. Broderick started to protest. It's too dangerous. Whitewater has eyes everywhere. If he sees you at the bank, asking for that box. Then we have to make sure he doesn't, she interrupted. Or that if he does, he sees exactly what we want him to see. A plan began to form in her mind, born of desperation and a fierce, primal need to protect her child and honor her dead husband. You said the townspeople think we're a new couple, madly in love, right? He nodded slowly, seeing where she was going. Newlyweds need things, she continued, a spark of defiance in her eyes. Supplies, fabric for curtains, a new pot for the stove. We'll go into town together. We'll play the part. We'll smile and laugh and hold hands. We'll go to the general store. We'll make a show of it. Then, while you're paying Mr. Peterson, I'll say I feel faint. The heat, the pregnancy. I'll say I need to sit down for a moment, on the bench right outside the bank. It was a risky plan. 100 things could go wrong. But it was the only one they had. The next day, they rode into Willow Creek. It was the most terrifying performance of Willa's life. She smiled until her cheeks ached. She leaned on Broderick's arm, laughing at things that weren't funny. She could feel the eyes of the town on them, and she knew that among them were the eyes of Whitewater's spies. Inside the general store, the act continued. They debated the price of flour. They picked out a bolt of blue calico fabric. As Broderick counted out the coins to Mr. Peterson, Willa put a hand to her forehead. "Oh," she gasped, swaying slightly. "I feel so dizzy." Broderick was at her side instantly, his face a mask of concern. "It's the heat. Come on, you need some air." He helped her outside, his arm securely around her waist. He led her to the bench in front of the bank, just as they'd planned. "You stay right here," he said, his voice loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "I'll get you some water." As soon as he disappeared back into the store, Willa took a deep, steadying breath. This was it. She stood up, walked the 10 feet to the bank's door, and slipped inside. The bank was cool and quiet. The teller, a young man with a thin mustache, looked up at her. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'm Willa Sutton," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "My late husband, Thomas Sutton, rented a safe deposit box here. I need to access it." She pushed the receipt and her marriage certificate across the counter. The teller looked at the papers, then back at her. A flicker of something, fear, recognition, crossed his face. "One moment, Mrs. Sutton." He disappeared into a back room. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Willa's heart hammered against her ribs. This was taking too long. Something was wrong. The teller returned, followed by the bank manager, a portly, balding man who was wiping sweat from his brow, despite the coolness of the room. "Mrs. Sutton," the manager said, his voice oily and false. "We are so sorry for your loss. Of course, you may access your husband's box. Right this way." He led her into the vault. A wall of metal boxes gleamed in the lamplight. He located the right one, used his key, and then handed her Thomas's key. "We'll give you some privacy." He and the teller retreated, closing the heavy vault door behind them. But it didn't click shut. They left it slightly ajar. They were listening. Willa's hands trembled as she opened the box. Inside, nestled on top of a stack of documents, was a thick, leather-bound ledger. She opened it. Page after page of the geologist's neat handwriting detailing the silver strike. And on the last page, a handwritten note from Thomas. "Willa, if you are reading this, then Whitewater has done his worst. This book is the proof. Don't trust anyone. Get this to the U.S. Marshal in Prescott. Broderick will know what to do. I love you. Always." Tears streamed down her face. He had known. He had been trying to protect her, even from beyond the grave. She tucked the ledger under her arm and put the box back. As she walked toward the vault door, she heard voices from the other side, the manager's hushed tones. "Told you she'd come for it. Mr. Whitewater was right." A cold dread seized her. The bank manager was working for Whitewater. It was a trap. They had let her get the ledger so they could take it from her. She was trapped in the vault. Broderick was outside, waiting, unaware of the danger. She was alone. She looked around the vault, her eyes wild with panic. There was no other way out. She pressed her ear to the crack in the door. She could hear them planning. They were going to wait until she stepped out, then take the book. But then she heard a new voice, Broderick's. "My wife felt faint," he was saying, his voice tight with an anxiety that wasn't part of the act. "She came in here a minute ago." "She's just finishing up, Mr. Quinn," the manager said smoothly. "She'll be right out." Willa knew what would happen. The moment she stepped out that door, they would grab her. Broderick would try to fight them, and he'd be outnumbered. They'd both be killed, right here in the bank. She looked down at the ledger in her hands. This book was the only thing that mattered. It was Thomas's legacy. It was her baby's future. It was the one thing Whitewater couldn't be allowed to have. Thinking fast, she scanned the small, cramped space. Her eyes landed on the banker's desk in the corner of the vault. An inkwell, a heavy letter opener, and a small pot-bellied stove used to heat the vault in the winter, its flue pipe running up through the ceiling. An idea, desperate and insane, sparked in her mind. She couldn't get the ledger out of the bank, but maybe she didn't have to. She tore a single page from the back of the ledger. A page of mineral calculations, important, but not the core of the proof. She tucked the page into the sleeve of her dress. Then, with a sob that was only half fake, she took the rest of the ledger, the priceless, irreplaceable proof of Whitewater's crime, and shoved it into the stove. She ripped pages from Thomas's letters, using them as kindling. She struck a match from the box on the desk and lit the pyre. Black smoke began to billow from the stove. Then she started screaming. The vault door flew open. The manager, the teller, and two of Whitewater's brutish ranch hands, who had been hiding in the manager's office, rushed in. They saw the smoke, saw Willa collapsed on the floor, coughing and crying. "The book!" one of the thugs yelled, rushing to the stove. He wrenched the hot door open, but it was too late. The ledger was a column of fire, the pages curling into black ash. It was gone. All of it. The bank manager stared in horror. "What have you done?" he shrieked. Broderick pushed past them, his gun suddenly in his hand. He knelt by Willa, helping her up, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the thugs, the smoke, the ashes. He understood instantly what she had done. "She could have suffocated," he roared at the manager, playing his part to perfection. "What kind of bank leaves a pregnant woman locked in a smoky vault?" He helped her out into the main lobby, his arm a steel band around her. The townspeople were gathering outside, drawn by the commotion. Whitewater's men couldn't do anything here, not in front of so many witnesses. As Broderick led her away, Willa looked back at the bank manager's face. It was a mask of pure terror. He had failed Whitewater. She had won the battle. She had destroyed the proof so the enemy couldn't get it. But as they rode out of town, the enormity of what she'd done crashed down on her. She had destroyed the only evidence they had. She had sacrificed justice for Thomas on the altar of her own survival. When they were far enough from town, Broderick stopped the wagon. He turned to her, his face grim. "You destroyed it," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. Willa pulled the single, smoke-stained page from her sleeve. "Not all of it," she said, her voice trembling as she handed it to him. He looked at the page of figures, then back at her. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile of pure, predatory admiration. "You magnificent, crazy woman," he breathed. "You didn't destroy the proof. You created a weapon." She didn't understand. "It's just one page." "It's one page in the geologist's handwriting, with figures that prove a massive silver strike," he explained, his eyes gleaming with a new, dangerous idea. "It's not enough to convict him in a court of law. But Whitewater doesn't know that. All he knows is that you walked out of that bank with a piece of the ledger. He thinks you have more. He thinks you have him." He was right. By saving one page, she hadn't preserved the evidence. She had turned herself into the ultimate threat. Whitewater would no longer be trying to scare her. He would no longer be trying to steal from her. Now he would have no choice but to kill her, and he would come for her himself. The mood in the cabin shifted. The waiting was over. The hunt had begun, but now they were the prey. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside was a potential threat. Broderick barely slept. He spent his nights sitting by the window, his rifle across his lap, watching the darkness. Willa, for her part, felt a strange calm settle over her. She had faced the fire and walked out. She had taken control of her own destiny. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but now it was mixed with a steely resolve. A few days later, one of Whitewater's foremen rode up to the cabin. His name was Jeb, a man with a cruel mouth and dead eyes. "Mr. Whitewater wants to see you, Quinn," he said, not bothering to dismount. "And your wife. He's hosting a dinner tonight. For his loyal hands and their families. He insists you be there." It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. "We'll be there," Broderick said, his voice level. As Jeb rode away, Willa looked at Broderick. "It's a trap." "Of course it is," he said. "He wants you where he can watch you. He wants to see if you'll crack. He wants to isolate us from the rest of the ranch." He paced the small cabin, his mind working furiously. "But we can use this. It's a chance to get inside the main house. A chance to find something else we can use against him." That evening, they walked toward the sprawling ranch house. It was lit up like a festival, music and laughter spilling out into the night. It was a grotesque parody of a happy home, hosted by a murderer. Whitewater greeted them at the door, his arms slung around Broderick's shoulders like they were old friends. "Quinn, so glad you could make it. And this must be the lovely Mrs. Quinn." He took Willa's hand, his touch lingering a moment too long. His eyes bored into hers, searching for any sign of fear. She met his gaze without flinching. The dinner was an ordeal. Whitewater sat at the head of the table, holding court, telling stories, his booming laugh filling the room. He kept directing questions at Willa, asking about her family back east, about her late husband. It was a cruel, psychological game. He was enjoying her discomfort. Broderick played his part perfectly, the loyal ranch hand, proud of his pretty new wife. But Willa could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hand never strayed far from the pistol hidden beneath his jacket. After dinner, as the men gathered to drink and play cards, the women were ushered into the parlor. It was Willa's chance. Feigning a headache, she excused herself, saying she needed a breath of fresh air. Instead of going outside, she slipped down a hallway toward Whitewater's office. The door was unlocked. The office was opulent, filled with leather-bound books and expensive furniture. A massive oak desk dominated the room. She began to search, her heart pounding with every tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. She didn't know what she was looking for. Anything. A letter, a journal, another ledger. She found it in the bottom drawer of the desk, hidden beneath a false bottom. It was a small personal diary. She opened it. Whitewater's spidery handwriting filled the pages. He wrote about the ranch, about his business dealings. And then she found the entry from the week of Thomas's death. Sutton is getting greedy. He refuses my offer. He thinks he can cut me out, file the claim himself. The fool. He doesn't understand how things work out here. I've arranged a little surprise for him and his pet rock pecker in the tunnel tomorrow. An accident. It's a shame. He has a pretty little wife back in town. Maybe I'll pay her a visit after. Comfort the grieving widow. The words leaped off the page, a confession written in black ink. It was everything they needed. More than the geologist's ledger, this was from Whitewater's own hand. She tore the pages from the diary. As she stuffed them into her dress, she heard footsteps in the hall. She froze. The doorknob began to turn. She dove behind the heavy velvet curtains just as the door opened. It was Whitewater. He walked over to his desk, humming a tune from the party. He opened the bottom drawer. Willa held her breath. He shifted some papers around, then closed it again, apparently not noticing the false bottom had been disturbed. He poured himself a brandy, then walked out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Willa waited, her body trembling, for what felt like an eternity. Then she slipped out of the office and back to the parlor. No one had noticed she was gone. She found Broderick catching his eye across the crowded room. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He understood. It was time to go. They made their excuses and left the party, walking back toward their small cabin under a sky filled with stars. They didn't speak until they were safely inside. The door bolted behind them. Willa pulled the torn pages from her dress and handed them to Broderick. He read them, his face growing pale. "This is it," he whispered. "This is the confession. We have him." But their triumph was short-lived. A sudden, loud banging on the door made them both jump. "Quinn," it was Jeb's voice. "Whitewater knows you're gone. He sent us to fetch you back." They were trapped. Whitewater must have gone back to his office, discovered the missing pages. The party was a pretext, a way to lure them into his grasp. Broderick looked at Willa. "Take this," he said, pressing the diary pages into her hand. "There's a loose floorboard under the bed. Hide it. No matter what happens, they can't find this." As Willa scrambled to hide the pages, Broderick drew his gun and went to the door. "What's the problem, Jeb?" he called out. "No problem," the voice sneered. "Mr. Whitewater just wants another word with you." Suddenly, the flimsy cabin door splintered, kicked in from its hinges. Jeb and two other men burst into the room, their guns drawn. But Broderick was ready. He fired first, his shot echoing like a thunderclap in the small space. One of the men went down. Jeb returned fire, a bullet tearing through Broderick's shoulder. He cried out in pain, stumbling backward. Willa screamed. From under the bed, she saw Broderick fall. Jeb stood over him, his gun pointed at Broderick's head. "Now," Jeb snarled. "Where is it?" "Whitewater wants his book back." He must have thought they'd stolen the entire diary. "Go to hell," Broderick spat, blood staining his shirt. Jeb laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. He cocked the hammer of his pistol. I'll ask your wife then, after I'm done with you. Willa knew this was the end. Jeb was going to kill Broderick, and then he was going to kill her. The baby inside her gave a violent kick, a jolt of life in the face of death. And something inside Willa snapped. The fear vanished, replaced by a cold, white-hot rage. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't a pawn. She was a mother. While Jeb was distracted, gloating over the wounded Broderick, Willa reached out from under the bed. Her fingers closed around what she was searching for, the heavy iron skillet she'd left by the hearth. With a primal scream, she scrambled out from under the bed and swung the skillet with all her might. It connected with the back of Jeb's head with a sickening crack. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he crumpled to the floor like a sack of grain, unconscious. The third man, stunned by the sudden turn of events, hesitated for just a fraction of a second. It was all the opening Broderick needed. Despite the fire in his shoulder, he lunged for Jeb's fallen pistol and shot the last man standing. Silence descended on the cabin, thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. Willa rushed to Broderick's side. "You're hurt," she cried, tearing a strip from her petticoat to press against the wound. "It's just my shoulder," he grunted, wincing in pain. You saved my life." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a new kind of wonder. "Thomas always said you were tougher than you looked." A noise outside made them freeze. Hoofbeats, a lot of them, heading straight for the cabin. "It's Whitewater," Broderick said, struggling to his feet. "He's coming to finish the job himself." They were wounded, outnumbered, and trapped. Whitewater was coming with all his men. This wasn't a fight they could win. "The floorboard," Broderick gasped, leaning against the wall for support. "The pages. We have to get them out of here." But there was no time. The riders were surrounding the cabin. Shouts and curses filled the night air. "Give it up, Quinn." It was Whitewater's voice, booming and confident. "You're finished. Give me my property, and I might let the woman live." Broderick looked at Willa, desperation in his eyes. It was over. They had the proof, but they were going to die with it. Just then, as Willa braced herself for the final assault, a new sound cut through the night. It wasn't hoofbeats. It was the sound of a bugle, a clear, sharp call that sliced through the darkness. From over the ridge, a new group of riders appeared. They weren't cowboys. They wore blue uniforms, and they were riding under the flag of the United States Cavalry. Whitewater and his men froze, stunned. At the head of the cavalry troop was a man with a silver star pinned to his chest. The U.S. Marshal from Prescott. He trotted his horse up to the cabin and dismounted, his eyes sweeping over the scene. "Looks like we got here just in time," he said, his gaze landing on Broderick. Broderick stared, his face a mask of disbelief. How did you know?" The marshal smiled. He reached into his coat and pulled out a piece of paper. A telegram. "We got this an hour ago. Said a man named Whitewater was about to murder 2 witnesses to a federal crime." Broderick and Willa looked at each other, confused. Who could have sent a telegram? The marshal pointed toward the back of his troop. A lone figure separated from the soldiers and rode forward. It was Mr. Peterson, the mild-mannered owner of the general store. "Mr. Peterson," Willa said, stunned. "I may run a store, Mrs. Quinn," he said, tipping his hat. "But I used to be a telegraph operator for the Army. I see a lot. I hear a lot. I've known for months that Whitewater was a snake. I just never had any proof. But when I saw you two today, the way you were acting, I knew something was about to break. And when I saw Jeb and his boys ride out of town after you, I figured it was now or never. I rode for the nearest telegraph station and wired the marshals." Whitewater, seeing the tables had turned, tried to bluff his way out. "Marshal, there's been a misunderstanding. This man, Quinn, he's a thief. He attacked my men." "Is that so?" the marshal said calmly. He turned to Willa. Ma'am, do you have something for me? Willa reached under the loose floorboard and pulled out the diary pages. She handed them to the marshal. He read them by the light of a lantern, his expression growing grimmer with every word. He looked up at Whitewater, his eyes cold as steel. Silas Whitewater, I have a confession, written in your own hand, to the murder of Thomas Sutton and John Albright. I'm arresting you and your men for murder and for conspiring to kill a federal witness. Whitewater's face collapsed. The bully, the tyrant, was broken. As the soldiers took him and his men into custody, a wave of relief, so powerful it made her knees weak, washed over Willa. It was over. It was finally over. In the aftermath, the doctor was summoned from town to tend to Broderick's shoulder. As he worked, Willa and Broderick sat in the quiet cabin, the truth of their situation settling in. Their marriage was a sham, a tool for revenge. Now that the revenge was complete, what was left? The claim is yours now, Broderick said quietly, breaking the silence. And the babies. Thomas made sure of that. You'll be a wealthy woman, Willa. You won't have to worry about anything. He was letting her go. He was releasing her from their bargain. It was what she should have wanted. Freedom, security, a new life. So why did the thought of it feel like a punch to the gut? What will you do? She asked. He shrugged, wincing as the doctor tightened the bandage. I don't know. My work here is done. There's nothing left for me in Willow Creek. He wouldn't look at her. She thought about the past few weeks, the fear, the danger, the lies. But underneath it all, something else had been growing. A trust, a bond forged in the fire. She thought of how he'd stood between her and danger, time and time again. How he'd looked at her when she saved his life. How he looked at her now. This man wasn't just her husband's brother. He was the man who had carried her when she fell, the man who had protected her, the man who had become her partner in every sense of the word. The marriage may have started as a lie, but somewhere along the way it had started to feel real. That's not true, she said softly. He finally met her eyes. There is something left for you here, she said, her voice trembling slightly as she placed his hand on her swollen belly. If you want it. The breath caught in his throat. He looked from her eyes down to her belly, where his hand rested. Awe, wonder, and a fragile, burgeoning hope bloomed on his face. The walls he had built around his heart, the walls of grief and revenge, began to crumble. Willa, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. My husband died in that mine, she said, tears welling in her eyes. But his child is going to live, and that child is going to need a father. This marriage, it doesn't have to be a lie anymore, Broderick. We can make it real. He stood up, ignoring the doctor's protest, and pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of his wounded shoulder and her belly between them. He rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Willa Sutton, he confessed, the words he'd held back for so long finally breaking free. I think I have since the moment I saw you standing in the dust, so fierce and so afraid. I came here for vengeance, but I found you instead. I love you too, she cried, the tears of fear and sorrow finally turning into tears of joy. Their story started with a gunshot and a lie. But in the heart of the unforgiving West, they had found something true. A family born not of blood, but of choice. A love forged not in peace, but in the face of death. Justice had been served, but the real victory wasn't locking Whitewater away. It was the two of them, standing together in the aftermath, ready to build a future out of the ashes of the past. It just goes to show you that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings. What started as a mission for revenge turned into a story of redemption, love, and the creation of a brand new family. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales of justice and unexpected twists. And let me know in the comments below. Do you think a love born from a lie can truly last?